Hey everyone, Jay Wallis here. I'm a news reporter down in Austin, Texas at KVUE, and proud to say former student of Greeley Kyle as well when he was at Missouri. And I wanted to just talk a little bit about my thought process and explain how I put some of my more quirky, weird, unusual stories together. It's kind of some backwards thinking, some weird processes, and so I wanted to dig into that a little bit. The first big thing I have to do when I tell these weird stories is I have to storyboard. I have to visualize what the end product is going to be like. That's honestly the hardest part in this is I have to make sure with the abilities I have with my camera in terms of shooting, what I can do with my editing software, and just how it can piece together. I have to make sure that logically makes sense and that it can literally be done. And the next step from that is I always want to make sure I am showing the viewer something, there's a purpose to it. I'm explaining something. I am giving the viewer something that is more valuable through an explanation, through something I can show with my hands, with my stand-ups, rather than just B-roll, which is something I am always encouraging my others and I'm always striving myself to do is to be different and unique. And this is just one of the ways I try to do that when I storytell. And so the big thing again is usually sometimes with packages or VOSOTs, just the different stories that I put together for the news. Sometimes you use your sound to construct your story, or you have a narration, a voiceover that I'm putting into the story. With these pieces, when I'm kind of doing it backwards, I have none of that before I visualize. So I don't have really a script written out. I don't have any sound. Sometimes I don't use sound. I first have to think about the big picture. Where do I want to start? Where do I want to end? Where do I want to go? Where do I want to take the viewer with me? And I know it sounds, corny, but that's something I really try to do is I want to take the viewer along almost an adventure through this story. I want them to be able to interact with it in a way with my stand-ups, if you want to call it that. I'm still trying to figure out exactly what I call these types of stories. My station calls them J stories, or they tell me to J it up. I don't know if I'm on board with that, but that's mainly what it's being called right now. But again, the start of it is just storyboarding, and then I'll go from there. Now, before I dig into the specifics of my Black Friday piece, I know Greeley recently showed you that story. I want to talk about one practical thing I always try to do. If I'm ever bringing something on the screen, like a text or something in my hand that I edit into my hand, I always try to put simple sounds that make you feel comfortable with something changing on the screen. I know it's a small thing, but just like how Nat sounds can really amplify a story, can make something good to great, I really think it's important to add these little sounds. Like if a text comes on screen, I might do this. I might put my lav up to my fingers when I do that. And then I use that sound as a Nat sound, as a click. Or if I want you to feel like a mouse is being clicked for some reason or another, again, I'll go find my mouse at my desk, click it twice with my lav. I've created hundreds of these just natural sounds that you hear every day in your everyday life. And I'm using these sounds when I edit weird things on the screen. That's a key point. It seems minimal and not that important, but it's a huge factor in my opinion. I'm always trying to create sounds to be a part of everything I edit. If you go back and watch that story, just pay attention when a text appears, when something all of a sudden is on my hand, when I'm wiping something, when I'm doing these motions, I'm making sure you're hearing something along with what you're seeing, always. So let's start with the first scene. I know it's weird calling it that, but in my mind, I break down the pieces of these type of stories by scene. The scene one is the opening scene when I'm on cam talking about just generically what Black Friday is, what it represents, and how the sales have changed. Again, a lot of pre-production, pre-thought before this even happens. I wanted to make sure and have a place where there was an area for text behind me. You saw that Black Friday appear above the KVUE sign. So I wanted the KVUE to establish this is a KVUE story. This is where we are. Kind of start in the newsroom and then have that Black Friday appear. And then again, pulling down that those signs that talk about the change in sales. That was a fact. That was a number we need to establish to show how important Black Friday is to our economy. And that is something I did rather than just having a graphic appear. I used my hand to act like I was pulling down these numbers in this text that gave you, that reminded you of maybe some sales signs you see in stores or whatever, that same text as well. And then again, I wanted to transition to the past. So how was I going to transition to the past? I wanted to pull away the door from the present, then to the past, because as I'm pulling away this door, you're seeing it go from color to black and white. Again, I thought of all of that before I even wrote a script. I'm like, I want to talk about why it's important, but then we need to go back to get the context. So to go back to get the context, I'm going to act like I'm pulling away the present, the screen, and going back to the past. Now, I don't want to get too much into the weeds of how I execute all of this. I use multiple editing softwares, mainly Edius, also Xpri, and Premiere as well. There's certain elements of editing that I like from each one. But just with this first scene, again, there's text on the screen, and all those shapes with the text that you see that's pulled down, all of that is just matching how it's going to end up on the XY axis. I make sure it moves down at the same pace as everything else. All that is lines and colors, lines and boxes that are certain colors, and then the text, and all that is just moving at the right pace. And then you hear the sounds match up with the movement. And then when I pull the screen to the side, all it is my hands were in this motion, and I make sure I'm moving the screen off with my hands. I'm moving it movement by movement where they match it with my hands, and I'm pulling that bar to where the screen is disappearing, and that the black and white that's behind it, that's been there the whole time. That's a layer underneath, so as that's disappearing, that black and white picture is already there in place. Now, this is something I really try hard to do. Whenever I'm talking about something in the past, I want you to feel like it's in the past, whether it's me changing the audio or changing the visuals, and that's what I did here. I found this New York Stock Exchange photo that I could use, and it's in black and white, and then I found that pocket where I could be. Now, how I was in the photo, this is green screen, right, where I put the green screen behind me, and so then I am in that video, and I can put me on top of anything. I can be anywhere, be on anything. So how I was that small at that angle, you see how I'm looking up because this photo was taken up high. So what I did it safely, but I put my camera on the tripod, made it as tall as it could be, and then put each leg on 4 boxes, put it up high, and pointing it down at the green screen. So then I was looking up at the camera at that angle in the right direction. And that's how I was able to put myself into the photo. And then I did some editing where I made myself a little grainy, a little blurry. I matched myself with the photo because if I was too crisp and too clear, I would not fit in with this photo. Again, I'm trying to make you feel like we're in the past. Now, the photos, those old photos of the characters I'm talking about in this, talking about what happened in the past, that was pretty simple. All I did here was I found these photos of these people, again, made them black and white, made them a little grainy, had them match the photo, and then I masked. I'm going to mention this a lot through my explanation, but this one of the biggest things I use today, and I would recommend everyone playing around with this, figuring it out, is just masking. And all that is you can draw a shape, and then you can take out the inside or the outside. You can do an effect to something on the inside or the outside of what you just drew. So you can draw around this character, and then you can just take out the outside. You're kind of just cropping out, but you're cropping out in a very specific manner where you can point out exactly what you don't want or do want. You can also do different things with masks where you can change certain colors. You can blur things out. I've done that a lot too with breaking news if you want to, or not necessarily breaking news, but if you need to blur out someone's face, you can mask around their face, soften the edges, and that's how you see a lot of some of those journalists when you see on air, they're taking away someone's face. They've masked the inside of the face and blurred that out. So again, I masked the outside of these photos and took away the edges and made them kind of be these little characters that move around on screen, making it fun. Again, remember the sounds. I make sure that I put sounds with all of their movements to make it entertaining and fun. And the last part of this, the coins on the right side, again, masked around this coin, had this image of a coin, had them drop down because I'm talking about the money. I'm talking about money. I want you to think money. And so then when I move it to the left, just like I did where I grabbed the screen and I moved it off, same concept. As the coins are moving right to left, I'm taking away this black and white picture. I'm kind of deleting it as it moves from right to left, and that image and the behind it or the next clip, that's already in place and that's ready to go. So at the start of the next clip, I mentioned when to become a shopping term. So I wanted something that evoked shopping. That's why I put that shopping center sign behind me. And I was actually too short when I found that spot I wanted to shoot there. And so I stood on a box to make sure I was tall enough. And that's something I always have, a box in my car, because I don't know when I'm going to be too short. if there's something in the foreground that I want. There's actually something I do in Austin all the time. The Capitol behind me, it's always too tall for me, and so I usually can get a great shot with the Capitol behind me here in Austin standing on that box. And again, as I mentioned before, wanting to evoke being in a different time period. 1961, I referenced that. That's why I made the video kind of black and white. Again, that's just changing the color, changing the audio. I made it a little muffled because if you're watching TV in 1961, the audio wasn't as clear as it is today. And then I needed to transition back to the present. I wanted to be creative about it, wanted to be quirky, and that's why I spun the screen. And again, I did that motion without it actually spinning, obviously, and that was the pre-thought. I had to think about it first to do that spin motion, where then I could also then catch it at the next scene. And again, not everything might be a home run, not everything might be exactly crisp, but I'm always trying to try things, and so this was one of those things, trying to spin the scene to the next part. So with the next part, we start off by talking about the Philly police. All right, now I'm not in Philly, but there are plenty of police cars in Austin. So what I did is I found the right angle where you couldn't see Austin police, but you could see the grills of the car, you could see the lights on top. So again, you're thinking about the police as we're talking about the police. Now when I pulled the Black Friday out of my jacket, again, I had to think about it first before I shot this. All I did was I did this. There was nothing in my hand, obviously. That Black Friday text is edited on. So then I just later, in production, as I'm editing, I put in Black Friday to make sure it matched my hand. Now, the time lapse happening behind me, that's really simple. All I did was everything that you saw in this scene was the camera never moved. It stayed recording the entire time. And so after I shot everything, I stepped around the camera and I let it sit there for about 15 minutes. So then all those cars that you saw zooming by actually did go by. I just sped up the time and I masked, again, remember masked, I mentioned about that. I masked around me. So then what was happening behind me when I actually shot that, where I was talking on camera, none of that was actually in that clip. It was only around me. If you watch really closely, you can see a little edge around me. That edge is the only part of that shot scene that was in that clip. The fast motion speeding cars behind me, that was just a time lapse of some cars that I shot. Now, when I moved myself back, I did that because I wanted to put Black Friday up big above me, because then I wanted to show the change from Black to Big Friday, and I just wanted to do that visually up above me. And so moving across the street, all that I did was I got in the middle of the street when it was clear and there were no cars, and I shot myself in that motion when I did that to kind of stop motion. And that then I just made myself bigger and smaller. It happened so fast you can't really tell. I'm not actually standing in place for all but one of those J's that you saw moving across the road. And so then again, when I got to the other side, I started the next part of that scene like this, in that standing motion. Then I turned and continued my script and changed the Black Friday to Big Friday. That's just putting text on the screen. And again, talking about wanting to make sure you see, hear, feel what's being said, what's being told to you in some way. I mentioned towards the end of this, I say, safe to say, that didn't stick. Stick. What do you think about sticking? Like a sticker. You feel that sticky motion. So then I need to transition to the next part of my story. So then I stick that on my jacket like a sticker, and I create a white border on the image so it looks like a sticker, right? Like the stamps that you see with the edge. And then I wipe that off with the sound of the peeling of the sticker to then transition to this next part. Next clip at the mall. All of this is just doing these motions and editing it in later. I do the push that creates the 2000s on the street, and then that's just adjusting the text. You can do 3D editing through my software where you can change the X, Y, and Z, and that's just changing how high it is on the screen and then bending it. So I just bend it to match the road, and then I move it onto the road. And again, remember masking. The way I'm able to move it where it appears past the edge on the road, it's not actually coming from the sidewalk. All that I'm doing is masking the area of the screen where I want it to come out of. I'm putting a line on it, so anything to this side stays put. It stays how it's shot, the ground, but anything to the right, that then is clear where then the text will show up. It's hard to explain, but when you start messing around with masks, you can start hiding certain things and making things appear when you want it to. But all the text coming down from the sky, that's just having it follow my hand, and then I do the little shakes with my hands so that the text can follow my hand and make it look like it's really there. And then walking off screen, all that's doing is making sure you walk off and then you re-enter at the right time when you shoot it on your camera. And it's a running theme, but I want you to see, to feel what I'm talking about. So just a simple thing mentioning turn back the clock. Well, I'm going to actually physically turn back a clock. And as I'm saying that, I had to be out here near the mall doing this motion as cars were driving by. I probably looked crazy, but then I edit it in later and it makes sense. And then the darkness, that's really simple. That's just changing the color, the sharpness, making it feel like midnight before I make it go black. And then to transition to the next scene, I wipe it all away while I use that squeegee sound. Again, I just made that out in my car. I made that squeegee sound and then applied it to that element to transition to the next scene. The next part on the street really isn't too tough. I mentioned before about the time lapse with the cars behind me. Same concept. So you see me walking towards the camera. There's, again, a layer around me. If you look closely, you can see there's not a time lapse going on right around the edges of my body walking towards the screen because I mask the area as I'm moving forward, and I move the mask. It grows larger as I'm walking to follow my body, and anything around me is not time lapsing. And then everything on the edges, that is just a clip where I held that camera still for 15 minutes and then just sped up the time. And it looks like there's a lot of traffic because I'm talking about how busy this holiday is. So I want to show you the activity around me as I'm walking towards you. And then again, walk off camera, make sure I walk from that angle of the camera to start the next clip. Now, having multiple versions of me in the next clip, there is no green screen involved. This is 3 clips shot from the exact same angle. So the camera starts recording and is not touched. So I shoot the first part where I walk in from the left. Okay, I shoot that, and then what I make sure and do, since I'm going to be talking to myself, then I make sure and turn and listen, and I look in the direction of where I'm going to talk. Now, again, if you look really closely, I sit really still when the other version of me is talking. The reason for that is because I can speed up myself, that part of the clip, when I'm turned and looking, and then I can put it back to normal speed right when I need to start saying my next line. So that first guy, I have myself talk, and then I turn, and I sit for longer than I need to, and then speed it up to where then I say my next line, which is said in real time of that first clip, where it matches up when the second J is finished talking. And then again, I just have to turn and look at the third J. So then I turn and I sit there for a good 30 seconds to a minute to clear that time and have myself looking at the third one. Now the second J, I mentioned about masking. This isn't masking. All this is doing is, in editing software, you can pull the left, the right, up, down, the different directions of your screen to only show certain portions of it, right? So that first clip, that first J, I pulled the screen up to that point, up to a line that then I softened so you can't tell it's broken up into multiple sections. So only a third of that clip is actually being shown. The second J, he's in the middle portion, right? So I come out of that door and I'm talking, and then I need to turn, same concept, I need to turn and listen to the first J. I sit longer than I need to, then I respond, and then I look at the third one. But I never if you notice, I never cross over myself because I'm able to mask it up to a line, and not mask it, but edit it to bring in the video to a certain portion of this screen. And the third J, he's just on the right side. That one's the easiest. All I do is walk in from the other side and then finish up this editing software. All the text you see is same thing. I bend it. I put the text where I want it to be. I mask certain portions of the screen so it can slide out from the door. And the reason the super didn't go away quick enough, that's on my producer's end. I had a time code when they needed to take it away. They were just a little bit delayed on that. But that's how I created 3 J's in a sequence. Camera stayed still. Those were 3 shots, all shot in succession with each other, that then I'm taking away certain parts of the screen so that all 3 J's are in the scene at the same time. Now, to get back inside KView, this wasn't that difficult to edit. It just took some foresight. So when I snap like that, my head's pointed a certain way. I'm standing the same when I go back inside. So then I just edit that's just putting 2 clips together like you do when you edit any type of story. that scene, that clip and this clip were just put next together, and then I snap myself back inside where I started. That's another part of this. Even though this is weird and different, I wanted to make sure and finish how I started. You usually try to do that with a soundbite or visually when you do certain packages, but I wanted to still do that start how I finished. So I'm back inside KView, and again, starting how I finished. Remember before I had that Black Friday text come up above the KView. This time I put a wreath since we're trying to look ahead. Usually in your tag you want to kind of look ahead. So we're talking about leading into the Christmas season. I use that music to make you think of Christmas, and I put that wreath up where the Black Friday was to again finish how I started. In terms of being creative and doing these types of stand-ups, it constantly builds on itself. You kind of have to mess around with certain things the first time you do it. It takes time to figure it out, but then once you do, the next time you do it, it's going to take a fourth of the time. And with that extra time you saved, you can maybe do something else on top of that. And then it continually builds and builds and builds before you can do 7 things when before you could only do 1 thing. And also, when you do these types of stories and when you're different and creative, and I know this is not conventional storytelling, I know it's not always going to click. I actually sent this story to Greeley. He's one of my mentors, and he gave me great advice for what he liked, what he didn't like, and what he would have done different. And that's key here, is it's not always going to be a home run. I probably could have changed a couple elements of this story and it might have been a little better. But the key is being different. So much of news today is so straightforward, and people aren't connecting with that anymore. People want to be able to see something different, to be entertained, but still be informed in a serious way. And this doesn't always work with every story. Like I said, I try to be different and innovative in more than one way. This is just a piece of it. This doesn't always work, but you should always be thinking of new and different ways to tell stories, because as great as my education was in college and what I learned from Mizzou and learned from Greeley, so much of what I figured out with what I like and what I like doing storytelling wise, I just had to figure it on my own. It wasn't taught. It was just figured out through a constant process of reading and watching and consuming not just news, but media. You can learn so much in terms of storytelling, not just from other local reporters in the news field. That is a great place to go to. I'm constantly watching news reporters out across the country that I appreciate, but there are some great YouTube storytellers that are phenomenal. Facebook, TV, and movies. It sounds silly, but I've used some elements in some cinematography that I see in a TV show that I really watch, and I try to apply it in a story where it fits. You should always be learning and trying to bring in new elements from all types of media into your storytelling. In terms of how long this takes to produce, it depends on how much of these types of stand-ups I've done in the past and know how to execute it. I will say in general for this story, it probably took me a full half day, 4 hours. It sounds crazy, but to actually envision everything. Again, I write these scenes, as I call them, and break it down piece by piece and make sure it all flows, and I think through it, and I make sure I have all the right editing software and locations, and I can actually physically make it happen. That's about a half day. It takes about another half day that same day or the next day to write it. To actually write it down, get the whole script put together. So a full day to envision and write the story. Now, in terms of shooting and editing, probably about a full day to shoot, to really get this thing down. And then I'll usually start editing at the end of that shooting day. But I need like a full day. So we're at 2 days total now. And then editing, man, I'd probably say about a full 2 days. So it's about 4 days to really make this Black Friday piece happen. So almost a full week, because then it would be ready to go the 5th day. It would take about 4 work days. So about, these are 8-hour increments, 8 hours, 8 hours, 8 hours, 8 hours, 8 hours. So probably about 30 hours to envision, to write, to shoot, to edit. Probably about 25 to 30 hours when you take into account taking some lunch breaks and making sure and giving myself a breather from all of this stuff. Probably about 25 to 30 hours to really piece this thing together. Now, I know we bounced around with a lot of topics. I did my best to give you an idea of my vision and how I actually execute these types of stories. But I would just encourage you to, again, continue to find new ways to be a storyteller. When you focus in on just being a different creative storyteller, it makes this job so fun. I love it when I get to do these types of pieces and I can just think outside the box and try to think of just weird, quirky ways to get my story, to get my facts, to get these pieces out to the viewer and continue to just learn from Greeley and continue to, like I said, consume all types of media. Find different weird ways that you can get inspiration for your next story and try to be the best storyteller you can be because that's what's going to make this job a blast. And hopefully, this video was somewhat educational, was somewhat informative. I enjoyed honestly breaking down some of the things I did with this story. And this is Jay Wallis from Austin, Texas, signing off.